Spotlight on Software Development series. I'm really pleased to introduce Paul Chiu. Thanks, Paul. Please tell me a little bit more about your background and career history to date.
Okay. Thanks, Nicola. Thank you for having me. Basically, for me, my sort of career, if you want to call it that, started when my parents bought me my first computer. So that was around, I think I was like 13, 14 years old. So I think, like a lot of people in my generation, we sort of started it as a hobby. Luckily enough, in my high school, we had a reasonable ICT program, they called it back then. And I was lucky in that our IT teacher was involved in the sort of education board of Queensland.
Okay.
So he was responsible for shaping the curriculum of high school IT at the time. So I had quite a good introduction to the field and the industry, I guess you could say, at that time. And then
was that IT generally? Or
yeah,
specifically?
IT generally. So at high school level, they taught us programming, they taught you basic word processing, they taught you how to use a computer, basically. But we got exposure, I think from our course, we got exposure to databases as well. So it set up a lot of foundational knowledge that would sort of otherwise be difficult to attain back in those days, before internet was super prevalent. But yeah, so after that, I was fortunate in that my sort of high school experience was quite positive. So very early on, I sort of knew this is what I wanted to do as a career. So being involved in IT, computers, and software in particular. So I continued that track in university, and then sort of got my first job as a software developer after completing all my uni studies. So in terms of getting back onto actual career track, I started as a in-house developer for a pharmacy. So this pharmacist sort of had ambitions of developing his own pharmacy management or really compounded medication software.
Which company was that?
It's a small outfit on the Gold Coast called BioFarm. He's still in business, so that's kind of good. So we sort of built his idea out in there, and then yeah, that was sort of my first foray into the industry. Then after about a year and a half, I left to join a web development agency. So the agency's core service was search engine optimization as well as general website development. So through that, I got to learn a bit more about development in general, got to work with a proper designer for the first time, and then sort of got into a more more professional, I guess you could say, way of working. And then the good and bad part is I got exposure to a lot of projects. Bad part is I sort of experienced burnout for the first time, because in agency work, there's a lot of clients to juggle, a lot of deadlines. It basically never stops, because if your agency is successful, there should always be a job lined up.
Yeah, absolutely, and very deadline, client driven.
Yes, 100%. And if the agency is to grow, you definitely need to, because that's the business, they're selling time.
Yeah.
So the more of your time they can sell, the better the business is doing. And I, at the time, didn't really have a good idea of how to manage my own work-life balance, because for me, I enjoyed the work. So it's just like fully dive in and put it in as much as I can. But obviously now I know that's probably not the most sustainable way of working.
And how did you overcome that work?
I quit and I went and did sort of contracting on my own so that I could set my own pace, but then discovered I'm not really that good a salesman. And then this opportunity came up where a friend's dad was actually teaching at CQ University on the Gold Coast. So he, in speaking with the faculty there, realized that there's a shortage in IT teachers, because honestly speaking, if you teach, your salary is lower than in industry. So they were having trouble there. And for me, it was okay, it's good supplemental income because teaching it only requires basically part-time effort. I was only teaching a couple of days a week. So that sort of that introduction allowed me to transition into teaching, which I ended up doing for 4 years.
What were you teaching?
It depends on the university, but at CQU, they allow you to teach up to your level of qualification. So I could teach basically any course I was comfortable with up to a master's level. So I also taught at Bond while they were, because Bond University on the Gold Coast, I'm not sure if they brought it back, but at the time they decided to sort of cancel or remove their undergraduate program. So I helped teach that out as an adjunct lecturer. But yeah, so that's sort of my teaching experience. And
so
then
it was all software that you were teaching?
Yeah, it was software, also some networking. What I like to say is that generally, because a lot of people get nervous about doing presentations and teaching, and what I say is, look, to be honest, all you have to make sure is you know more than your students. So I basically, because I had enough industry knowledge at the time that when I reread those textbooks and reread all the course notes and material, I can absorb it a lot quicker, and I could actually explain it in a more consumable way for the students, or more digestible way for the students. So that was basically my job. Because as a casual, we don't set the curriculum. So we have the CQ University in Rockhampton, that's the main campus. Yeah. So they set the curriculum. We're just there to sort of deliver it. Yeah.
So what made you did that for about 3 years, I think. So what made you leave lecturing and go back into industry? I think as a software developer, around about 2013?
I think 2013, to 2015, I forget exactly. So
what made you go back into industry?
So CQ University, the Gold Coast campus, they decided to shut it down.
Oh, okay.
So everyone was made redundant. So it was either apply for work in Brisbane campus or apply for other sort of BC level universities, or do something else. And for me, my challenge is I tend to get bored somewhat. Easily is a relative term, but after a few years, I tend to get bored of doing the same thing. Yes. So I figured, okay, might as well give development another shot. And at that point in time, because for me, the way I experienced burnout was every time I looked at a computer screen or thought about, writing a program, I would get this sense of dread and, sort of real emotional turmoil is putting it a bit hard, but basically sort of a general sense of discomfort. And for me, about 1 or 2 years into my teaching, I sort of lost that because I knew that, okay, I no longer associate the activity with sort of negative emotions. And that's when I need sort of, it's fine for me to go back and fine for me to try something else. So
it worked out well in the end.
Yeah, it worked out well in the end. So it was actually really hard because I didn't know the Brisbane market at the time. So I sort of just applied based off Seek ads. And the market is so different right now. Whereas these days I would recommend someone find yourself a recruiter and then they'll do all the work for you. Back then it was just constantly applying, and then because my experience was a bit disjointed and, to be honest, not that rich. I think I struggled. I think I applied for like 10, 20 jobs before really getting in with Tamando.
And I think as well, at that particular point, 2013, 2014, the market was still quite difficult.
Okay.
Post Campbell Newman, so.
Oh really? I didn't know that.
Probably a reason why. There was difficulty as well. But as you say, you need to not just rely on Seek. A variety of avenues, I think, in your job search. So sorry, I interrupted you.
No, sorry.
Went to Tamando.
Went to Tamando. Was hired as a senior developer because the benefit of working in an agency is that you get exposure to a lot of different technology, And being a small agency, it was actually only 3 people there. We had basically the founder, who's basically an accounts man, who was really good at sales. Yeah, really good at sales, at keeping clients happy. And then we had a designer, and then myself to actually implement whatever was sold. So that enabled me to sort of get a lot of experience through a lot of different projects. So yeah, lucky enough to get hired as a senior, and then from there, as I sort of worked in the team as opportunity, because Tamando was a growing company as a startup at the time, so as opportunities came up, I was always sort of happy to step up or step in to any roles that were offered, and then eventually got myself promoted to development manager. And then did that for, I think, year and a half.
So after Tamando, you then went to Culture Kings.
Yeah, so after Tamando, I decided I needed another change again.
Yeah.
So joined Culture Kings as a senior dev, and then worked in the e-commerce team for a while.
Okay.
And then as Culture Kings, again, a growing business, as people got promoted, there were sort of gaps that needed to be filled. I put my hand up, so I was informally team lead for a little bit, and then the opportunity came up that they sort of needed a head of IT as the head of e-commerce transition into being the COO. So I was sort of fortunate enough to be offered that role, and I took it. And then I did that for a year and a half as well, and then decided, okay, I needed a break from that, because being a sort of senior manager type role is quite a lot of responsibility and quite, I guess you could say stressful, is the easiest way to say it. So needed a break from that, and now I went into a completely different industry, and I'm a full stack developer at For The Record.
For The Record, tell me a little bit more, what do For The Record do?
So For The Record, we do sort of, well, our CEO just sent out a new email sort of redefining or reiterating what we're about. So For The Record, and it's a company that deals with court recordings.
Okay.
But the key business or the vision for the business is to be a content management system for court records and court recordings. And the whole purpose of that is to ensure that everyone has access to justice, as the CEO would like to put it. So what that means is that if you have a case or if you have a hearing, that you can get access to hearing notes, you can get access to annotations, to transcripts, to recordings, or whatever you need to sort of help you proceed.
So it's going to make a big difference in somebody's life, whether they're going to be found guilty or not guilty.
Quite possibly. I unfortunately don't have a legal background, so I don't know how the whole thing plays into it. But the team I'm working on, we work on what's called the FTR Platform.
Yes.
So what that means is that we provide an online portal for people to order transcripts, to order audio recordings, or whatever is relevant to them. And this people could be the general public, or it could be lawyers, it could be court administrators, it could be legal aides, it could be judges themselves. So anyone, sort of any stakeholder that's involved in the legal process, we allow them access to sort of these recordings. Yeah.
And you're a full stack developer there, so what kind of technologies and projects are you working on?
So we currently use TypeScript as our main programming language, and that's running on Node.js. We also use, so that's on the back end. On the front end, we use Angular, the framework.
Yeah.
And in terms of infrastructure, we're heavily AWS focused, but there's also a sort of relationship with Microsoft that exists. So we have some technology that's on Azure Cloud as well.
Excellent. So you've been there for a few months now. Can you see yourself heading into your next leadership role?
To be honest, I'm still taking it easy right now. I don't know. I don't want to be presumptuous and say that, you know, it's something that, generally if it's something that comes up, I'll have a think about it. Because for me, my feeling is always, you know, if an opportunity exists, give it a try. Worst case, you fail. But now that I've done it twice, I think I'm a bit more selective because I kind of been through the motions. I know what's involved. I know what's expected of me. So it's not so much I'm jumping in just to see what it's like. It'll be I would only want to jump in if I know that I can do the job well. And I think there's a sort of mutual benefit in me taking on that role.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, the reason I asked you that question is because it seemed at both Tamando and also at Culture Kings, it happened very organically rather than by design. So how were you handpicked, do you think, or chosen to move into those leadership roles?
I don't know the real reason, to be honest. But I would say that as someone that was a development manager, as someone as head of IT, the way I normally pick out people that I would like to promote is by looking at sort of their work ethic, by looking at how willing they are to take on different tasks. Because the challenge with a management role or in a leadership role is that it's very loosely defined. So as a developer, we have more or less an engineering or engineered process where we say, okay, this is the backlog, this is how we define acceptance criteria, this is, everything's, it can go through a business hours, it can be well specified, it can be well defined, you have very clear boundaries of what you have to do. You know when you've done your job well, you know when you haven't done it well, while you're doing it. In a management role, it's quite often, it's the complete opposite. So you could have the CEO say, hey, I'm not happy with how this is going, change it. They may not say much more than that. And then you just have to figure out, okay, how should I change it? What do they actually want? And then sometimes it may be a change in the way the team works, or it may be a change in culture they want. And there's no playbook or there's no recipe for how you achieve that, because it largely depends on the people you're working with, what they're used to, what are their expectations, and you're sort of playing middleman a lot of the time. For me, identifying someone who's able to sort of roll with the punches, who's highly flexible, adaptable, who doesn't really have a focus of, because sometimes some people have an attitude of, oh, I don't know if this works, like why can't it be this way? It's more you kind of have to think, not think optimistically, but just think your way around problems and think about how things could be possible. Because end of the day, for me as a manager, your goal is to remove blockers.
So it's really interesting that your flexibility, your adaptability, your possibly getting bored easily is what actually led to your success from a software developer to a leader.
I would say so.
Offered that opportunity.
I would agree with that. It definitely highlighted my willingness to try something new to the business or to the businesses I were working with, and that hopefully sort of gave them the idea that it may be worth giving me a shot.
Absolutely. Definitely, and I guess the software developer is something that's quite tangible, quite black and white. Whereas you say as a leader, there's so many kind of unknowns, and you're dealing with the people. So the unexpected can happen there as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've read a couple of your blogs which were really interesting about transitioning from a software developer into a technical leader and the challenges that you experienced. What were those challenges and how did you overcome them?
Well, I think my first challenge was sort of just not knowing what to do in general, because you can sort of observe other managers, you can, because at Tamando we didn't really have a leadership program where they tell you, okay, this is how you're expected to act, this is how you're meant to manage. It's more just we had other managers that already knew what they knew, and you sort of just follow their pattern. But I felt like for my own sort of experience and for my own journey, I felt like, okay, if I had a roadmap, I could have probably avoided some mistakes. And as I sort of got into management roles, I have a lot more developers that I work with, ask me, hey, how do I go down this track, and what advice would you give me? So that's why I sort of started blogging about the topic, because I think for developers, we're generally just so focused on the craft of writing, building software that we don't really think about too much else. Although these days I would say it's getting a lot better, because everyone knows, these are the possible career tracks you could have, and you need to consider these things, and you need to consider team dynamics and all this stuff. So there's definitely a lot more knowledge around. So for me, it's just about contributing my experience and my perspective, I guess, to the body of work that exists.
So you'd have liked a roadmap, but a fairly loose one as a guideline, rather than something that's really rigid.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think, well, it depends on the company. Because one thing I learned is that, as we hire managers from other companies, a manager that I really respected, he came from Suncorp, and they appear to have, or from his description, appear to have a very, well-defined training process for their managers and leaders. So they knew what they had to do, they knew what their responsibilities were. And I think that can work for some companies, and it can work for some personalities, but for others, it's just like they do what they want to do, and then they see how it works, they see how people respond. Because what I like to say is, not all managers will give you the same results every time. Sometimes personality type A with company type B will just never work out.
No.
But you then put them into a different company, and magic will happen. So it's really up to you to sort of stay true to yourself. If that's the way you want to be, because a benefit of teaching is that I got to talk to a lot of different lecturers, and one of my colleagues was a sort of a management lecturer, and then so I got exposed to, there's in management, especially in management school, they try to turn it into a science. So you have like your authentic leaders, which is popular now, you have your charismatic leader, you have your transformative leader, etc. And then, so there's all these different categories that you can either be put in, or you can sort of try and make yourself be. So for me, I'm more of an authentic type person. So I find it really hard to sort of transition from one to the other, so I can only be one mode, because I'm really not a professional manager. Because a saying I like is, if you can't adapt, then you're just a hobbyist, you're not a professional, right? Absolutely. So for me, a professional manager, that's more useful for them to know. And if that's the track you want to be on, then you obviously have to, no matter which company you're in, you have to decide what type of leadership style, what type of management style will get you the right results. But for me, I like to, as you said, it's more organic for me. So for me, if I find that, I can contribute to the business, or I can contribute to the team in a way that's beyond the initial scope of my role, I'll be happy to do that. And that's sort of how I evolve into a more management responsibility type of role.
And I think that evolution is really important, as you say, rather than trying to be that kind of chameleon and adapting needs such, so people get that authenticity through you. And so you've had these particular two leadership roles, you've written your blogs. If you could go back in time, what would you do differently?
Well, I think that the hardest part is sort of, because when everything's going well, it's easy.
Yeah,
it's when you have challenges with certain team members, challenges with projects that are probably set up for failure from day one, challenges with, let's say, managing up and different expectations. So how I handle all that were, I would say, not always effective. And you also have the challenge of really understanding who you're trying to communicate to. Because for me, a lot of management is, if you can't, you have a message to deliver from upper management, from either your CEO or whoever's CTO, whoever's calling the shots. You have to deliver that to the team. the team will either come back with, yes, we can do it, or no, we can't do it, or something in between, and you have to deliver that message back. And you're part of this negotiating process that's not really a formal negotiating process. And if you're not able to communicate effectively to either side, you become part of the problem.
If you're not filtering
Yeah.
either down or up,
Yeah.
and you're just a mouthpiece,
Yes.
then you're not really serving.
Yeah,
a
exactly,
purpose.
exactly. And I like to, when I talk to recruiters, I tell them, I think you're in a similar role because you're trying to bring two sides together, right?
Yes.
To meet at either whether a role is right for a particular person or if a particular salary is right for a particular role. It's always a very sort of fine line you have to walk and make sure both sides can see the other side's, I guess, valid points, invalid points, and really get people to reach an agreement.
And be transparent, but yet sensitive at the same time, and
Yeah,
break somebody
yeah,
with feedback, make it constructive.
yeah, exactly.
Which I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because if you're taking on a new developer on your team, what do you really look for? What are the key characteristics, apart from obviously skill set, that you really look for when you're taking somebody on?
Yeah, so for me, I tend to look for, and this is different for everyone, every team, every organization.
But more generally.
Yeah, but more generally, I try to look for generalists, actually. So I prefer to work with people or have people on the team that are naturally curious about technology, but that also have a pragmatic understanding of why we're here, right? Because I've seen devs that go too far in either direction. They're either 100% pragmatic and in terms of, okay, this is the quickest way to get something done, we should just do it.
It's probably from the agency world.
Yeah, exactly.
Just get it done.
Just get it done, forget about tech debt, forget about, what's going to happen down the line. Because sometimes in a startup, you may only have 6 months or 1 year runway. So in that case, it's valid because there's no point building a system that you're expecting to last 10 years when the business may not be around in 2 years. So it's got to be fit for purpose. But at the same time, on the other end of the spectrum, if you can have someone that's too curious, who always wants to, build something in flavor of the month, then you have, exactly, then you have all these different pieces of technology that then becomes impossible to onboard someone for, because whenever you got to hire someone to not just know one programming language, they got to learn 5, and not just know one framework, they got to learn 10. It just becomes a real challenge.
So the curiosity, the adaptability, but not just wanting everything, all the newest.
So it's really finding the right sort of position on that spectrum that I think is important for an organization to know. Because, for example, if you're in a research and development department, then I would say, yes, definitely allow for more curiosity, allow for more creativity in your candidates. But if you're in a sort of startup environment where your runway is really short, then definitely just hire people and select for people that just want to get things done, so you can really prove that you actually have a business before you think about how long your technology is going to last.
So that's really interesting about the curiosity and also being practical as well. Another hot topic is about whether a degree is necessary for a software developer today. There's a variety of different views. What's your view on the necessity to have a degree to be a software developer?
Yeah, so whenever I'm asked this, I always have to state my bias, because having taught at uni and having been part of sort of the academic system, I do see the value in getting a degree. So what I try to explain is that a degree prepares you for almost any role in industry. So when I went through my degree, we were taught not just programming, we were taught database management, we were taught software architecture, we were taught systems architecture, we were taught algorithms, we were taught different computer science concepts. So there's all these different things that are taught, programming management, technical communication. I could go on, like just go read what's available. Yes, exactly. Because let's say that you don't know where you're going to end up, right? So you're looking to join a company, you don't know where you may be. By having a degree, by having exposure to all these different topics, all these different subjects, it means that once I was promoted to a role where I'm having to manage work, I can recall my project management course and say, well, this is generally probably how I should manage a project. Or I can look at how a project manager is approaching things and go, okay, they're doing it this way because that's how we're taught. It's the way of things. So it gives you a sense of perspective that I think would otherwise have to be gained through experience. That's not to say I don't value experience. So I think because these days there's definitely a skills shortage. If you spend 3 years, in Australia anyway, 3 years at university, that's 3 years you could be earning possibly quite a good salary, right? And rather than paying money, you could be making money and you could be gaining valuable experience. So, and I know a lot of good developers and good managers that are not qualified with a university degree, and they do just as well as people with degrees. So it's definitely not something I would say you have to do. It just helps if you find that, if you think that, it's impossible to predict. This is the challenge.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's so, as you say, it's your personal view.
Exactly.
But if you had two candidates,
you
wouldn't necessarily reject them on the basis of not having a degree.
That's correct.
But you would consider it in a really good light.
So I think, I think so. For me, it has to be a personal decision. Yeah. Like if you feel like the university, what's being taught will be useful to you, or you're interested in a broader range of topics than just how to do a job, then definitely go look at universities and look at the courses provided. If you're just interested in doing a job and following a strict career path, then you don't need it. Because what you can do is you can go into a job, learn on the job. Before you're about to transition, hire a coach, read books, read blogs, etc. And then you sort of will have a similar level of preparation.
Which was actually my next question. I mean, obviously you did your degree a few years ago. You were a lecturer. And how are you doing your continuous learning? Reading blogs online?
So I read blogs, I read management books, I don't really read programming books. That's no longer a thing. You tend to learn on sort of documentation pages and websites and whatnot, because it's a lot more interactive. I would say I am always sort of trying to educate myself and trying to broaden. It may not even broaden how much you know, but just see things in a different light. And
IT, software development, is constantly changing, which is what I find really exciting about being part of this industry, is that constant change and what have you. So
agree.
Obviously you've got to be on the pulse all the time.
Yeah, so like trying to pick winners and losers is something I try not to do, but obviously, for example, I know this last few years React has become huge in Brisbane. For a while there was a lot of hype behind Golang, but that's sort of gone down now. It comes back to this being authentic to yourself. If you are happy experimenting with a lot of technology, then definitely learn whatever you want to learn. But if you're just thinking about it professionally, then you probably have to be more discerning with how you spend your time.
Absolutely. I think there's quite a few roles with Vue now, Vue.js.
Yes,
as well.
Exactly. So that's the sort of number two.
After React and Angular. And you kind of brought me on to my next subject, which is about, or my final subject actually, about what you think will happen in the Brisbane tech scene over the next few years. What do you think will be the next big thing?
Well, it's hard for me to say, but I think right now definitely Microservices is popular. Having serverless infrastructure is popular. Having sort of almost back-endless systems is also sort of starting to become more of a sort of mature pattern, you could say. So things like, there's a company called Zeet, I don't know how to pronounce it, Z-I-E-T.
Okay.
What they do is they provide sort of serverless infrastructure, so all you have to do is write a function, upload it, they take care of the scaling for you, they take care of a lot of sort of infrastructure maintenance for you. So things like DevOps, you don't have to worry yourself with it until you reach a certain scale. So this means that you focus on what makes your application unique, which generally could just be the front end.
Yeah.
So that, to me, is something that could happen more with the startup space. But obviously with larger enterprises, larger companies, they still have, it's probably in their best interest to keep as much in-house.
From a security perspective?
From an IP perspective. Because the more you rely on a third-party vendor, they will have constraints in their own product that you will inherit. So for a larger business, I think, if you can build it yourself, it'll probably pay off in the long run, even though it takes a lot of discipline. It depends on how much financing you have as well, how much you can bankroll. So, but I think in terms of back-end technology, that's not going to go away, despite everything being out there. Because it's one thing to say, okay, we have a product that's ready to show. It's another thing to have a service that's well engineered and that can run 24/7 with 5 nines uptime, etc. So in terms of the next big thing, I can't really pick one, to be honest.
It's a bit of a crystal ball.
It is.
But I think what you've said's really interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, it comes down to what the company's goals are and what they're happy with. Because I'm working with a friend now who's part of his consideration for what technology he's going to use is how easy it is for me to attract developers to my business if I choose this technology versus a different one.
And from a Paul perspective, what's the next big thing for you? What can you see happening in your career in the next few years?
Well, I think for me it'd be, because I've worked for a lot of different companies now, it'd be definitely branching out on my own again.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so previously I did try contracting freelance, wasn't too successful. Who knows, maybe I'll give it another shot and then see what happens.
Absolutely. Well, I did it, obviously different industries, but I thoroughly recommend it. So if I can give you any advice, give me a call.
Definitely.
But thank you very much. I really appreciate you being my first guest on the Spotlight series. Thank you very, very much. Until next time.